Alrighty, well, I am really excited to just be able to introduce my friends to you today. Because that's who we've got speaking here. Shanai Matteson is an artist, a community-based researcher, and a cultural organizer who grew up in Aitkin County and is based there currently. And Hudson Kingston is an environmental and public health lawyer who lives in Ely. So we're so excited to learn from you today. Welcome up to the stage. Hudson, are you getting started?
Hello, can everyone hear me all right? Great. And I assume everyone can hear me on Zoom. Let's see if I can do slides. Oh, technical difficulties.
Hope I didn't make up.
Yeah, okay, great. So we will be talking, we'll be having some healthy skepticism of technology. So when the technology comes back and gets us, I hope everyone just gets a good laugh out of that. Especially when we try to play this video. Anyway, so this presentation has had 3 names now. We finally settled on this one. Experimental Futures in Our New Age. That was supposed to be the movie voice of the 1960s. So water, mining, and money. And we are trying to make this a fun presentation, so forgive us if it is not as serious as it should be. So Minnesota's exciting future today. In an era of great technological and policy change, Minnesota is currently at a crossroads, yet again, of conservation or whiz-bang techno-optimism. Shanai and I are here to present on a time not too long ago that this happened before, and see if we can learn a few lessons from this amazing and honestly very bizarre example from Minnesota's recent history. So does this sound familiar to you all? A charismatic futurist from South Africa has invented technologies that are changing American society. He is also a media icon whose thoughts are sent out to millions of Americans on a weekly basis. His exploits include lecturing politicians and industry alike on ways to deal with some of the biggest problems of our era. And he's also kind of a jerk. Does that sound familiar? Does anybody know what year I'm talking about?
Today.
Yeah. Anybody guess what year it may have been in the past? Ballpark? About 1965, and the South African in question is Dr. Athelstan Frederick Spilhouse. He's actually a professor and a dean at the University of Minnesota, an oceanographer and geophysicist who also invented the Skyway system. So if you've ever been in a Skyway, you can thank him. He invented a device that sinks U-boats, which is why he was internationally famous. He killed a lot of Nazis. And he also, using that fame, wrote a syndicated comic book called Our New Age that appeared in the Sunday Funnies every week in 100 or more newspapers. He conceived of the Sea Grant University, which was passed by Congress in 1966 and funds the University of Minnesota, among many other large universities. And he was very concerned with urban sprawl, poorly planned cities, and waste and pollution, which obviously were big issues in the 1960s, leading to the modern environmental movement. Also, Athelstan Frederick Spilhouse is coincidentally the name of my cat. But anyway, the way that he contacted all of the children of America on a weekly basis were these amazing Our New Age comics that, as I said, showed up in the Sunday comics. Does anyone remember reading these? That is awesome. I missed them at the time. But in this one, he explains that in the future, we'll all live in cities in the ocean. Hooray. And then in this one, he explains that we'll all live in cities on Venus. Why Mars? Let's just go straight for Venus. And then perhaps his most daring idea, we'll all live in cities in rural Minnesota. And this was the biggest idea that he came up with, one of the biggest ideas that he furthered in his lengthy career of inventing things, the Minnesota Experimental City. Does anybody remember the Minnesota Experimental City? Fewer hands, but still a couple people. Yeah, so it was presented as this panacea for urban sprawl. It was going to be a test city with 250,000 people, a quarter of a million people, that would address the issues of waste and sprawl and pollution in cities. Everything would be recycled. Everything would be planned very well so that there was green space, pedestrian corridors. The whole thing would be under a geodesic dome. How can you get cooler than a geodesic dome? And therefore it would be climate controlled in the middle of winter. It would just be so pleasant to be in this amazing city. There would be underground transportation. So all of the pollution coming out of trucks delivering food to the city would be captured in the tubes and then cleaned. So 1960s carbon capture. Everything would run on nuclear power plants. What could possibly go wrong? In fact, it was such a daring and popular idea that it had significant political support, both from the federal and state governments. The Star Tribune was really into it. Buckminster Fuller signed up to help them make the dome. They had everything. And in 1971, Minnesota passed a law establishing an experimental city authority, basically an agency that existed to make sure that this project happened. So that's where we got to as far as 1971. This is where our technology may fail us. Because Shanai, we have to play our video.
Right now?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That was
I
fast.
talk very fast, especially in the music.
What is more on the cats?
Yeah, we can go back to the cat. real
Yeah,
quick.
so if someone can help me switch over to the
Mhm.
to the video, so just I'll tell you a little bit about where I come in here. So my name's Shanai. I grew up in northern Aitkin County. And I went to see this documentary called The Experimental City because I was kind of a science nerd. History of science and technology really interests me. And I was watching this documentary and it got to the part where they talked about where the experimental city was supposed to be. And I realized right there that had this experimental city been built, it would have been built exactly where I was born and grew up. It would have been in Aitkin County. A city of 250,000 on top of a town or many towns of like 50 to 150 people. And so I was like, wow, why is Aitkin County such an attractive place for these kinds of proposals? Because not only have we had an experimental city proposed in Aitkin County, we have also had a garbage incinerator on the banks of the Mississippi River. This was about 15 years ago, and my grandmother, who's still alive today, she was part of the local resistance to that proposal. We also had the Sandpiper oil pipeline, which some of you probably remember, which, you know, Anishinaabe people in the community stood up against that along with local residents. And then the Line 3 oil pipeline, which we all know was constructed. And now we have a nickel mine from Talon Metals and Rio Tinto. So what is it about places like this that are so attractive for these types of proposals, and who is not at the table when these things are being planned? And importantly, who is not in this vision of the bright green future? So those are some of the things I want you to think about. And we're going to play just like a 5-minute section of the film where they're talking about site selection and also some of the politics and the connections between wealthy industrialists and city planners and the best and brightest experts who are deciding together where to put this experiment. And then I think we'll roll into, I'll tell you a little, we'll talk a little bit about some of the environmental laws involved here, and then the current proposal by Talon Metals and Rio Tinto, which I know way too much about. And then maybe we can have a discussion about some of your observations. So, you know, to answer those questions, I'd love to hear what you all see and how it maybe relates to things in your community. So we'll give this a shot. Do I have to put the microphone like right
I can
here?
hold on to it. I'll
Okay.
take care of that.
Okay.
Wink.
Where's the sound?
Yeah.
Just a sec.
It's not coming out of the speakers.
See, we said the technology would come back to us.
Okay.
Is it,
Minimize this.
oh, maybe it's this one?
Not use
Do this one.
Okay.
Okay, try that. Okay. You can go back just a sec, yeah, that's fine. And then- Where's it?
Go back to restart.
Right here?
That's what we don't know.
Sorry, guys. Trust me, though, it's gonna be worth it. There's some really, really good wetland photos in here for wetland enthusiasts. You're gonna wanna see this. Oh, yeah, I will maybe CC closed caption just in
Yeah,
case.
that's louder.
Okay, and can you hit the CC? And then we can make it big.
You're rolling a boulder up the hill here, and every little inch makes a difference. And you talk to legislators. And some people will say it's absolutely crazy. And then again, we had people that say, well, let's think about it. You know that there are two things that you don't want to know the process of. One is making sausage and the other is legislation. And this would be no exception to that. How their constituents come out and had more hearings in the Senate and finally got it up to the floor of the Senate, and it was passed about 4:30 or 5 o'clock on the last day.
Charles said it's precarious, and I said, here's plan B. If this doesn't go in Minnesota, we go to Wisconsin.
Here we've got the Minnesota state government interested enough to create a quasi-governmental agency. And its principal task will be to work and develop site criteria and designate a site for a presentation to the 73rd session of the legislature.
Having a tangible site in Minnesota, it would no longer just be an idea.
The site. Pollution Control Agency has to have 60 days to deliberate on that site, which they must do.
Although it really would just still be an idea, but having the tangible site and public approval, as it were, we would then have a real platform from which to move on.
So they must select the site before the legislature convenes in 73.
So that our pressures then will be to get the governor to act and appoint this 11-man authority.
Very rarely do you have a chance of a fantasy becoming a reality in your life. And this was that point. And all these things that you had studied, because I was an urban historian, suddenly I was the person like they were 100 years before. I'm standing there and we're on this hill and there's beautiful lakes all around. And you could just see this gorgeous setting for a city. And my first thought that came through my mind was, should it be Lefko Lake or Lake Lefko? We had done what we thought was an effective screening process. And there was the site that everybody loved, which was Douglas. Beautiful, lake filled. This was going to be the town in paradise. Now, the town in paradise already had people who didn't want their lifestyle changed. And so in reality, there was no way in God's green earth that we were going to be in Douglas. When you can't go somewhere politically, what is your choice?
Didn't gather from your description of this area was really very attractive. I mean, it isn't Dorado Beach or, you know, something like this. But why put yourself behind the eight ball? There's something about it that makes it an ideal place for a city.
One of the things that recommended it was the fact that it is about 85% in public ownership. In other words, so that you're not going to have to go in and disrupt a lot of people.
The site is terribly important, and it shouldn't be based on the availability of land.
But all I know is with the elements of protest in our country today, we haven't been too successful in getting people to agree. And if we're going to really build this city, you got to get the land.
I can't tell you that everyone jumped up with joy and said, someday my soul will be in Swatera. But given the fact at that point you didn't have time or the money to go back and redo the rest of the state, then Aitkin becomes as logical as any place because it's the poorest place. They will not only welcome you with open arms, but you are the heroes. You are the savers and salvation. That was our perception of Aitkin.
Although the first planning for MXC got underway in 1966, Aitkin County residents said they hadn't heard about it until this year. Director of the experimental city, James Alcott.
Well, the people by and large were very curious and very nice. It's a classic Minnesota response.
And then we met with county commissioners, talked with them.
And they were not so taken with the idea of the experimental city as such, but because things were so desperate, some people could see what any kind of economic development up there might mean.
It would mean jobs for young people who now move to the cities.
The experimental city authority people have been studying this for years. We take it for granted that they know what they're talking about, that the money is going to be spent, and if it's going to be placed anyplace, we want it in Aitkin County.
But those surrounding the proposed city site seem to oppose the concept of a new city. Their reason, destruction of the environment.
So that was the part I wanted to show. And we'll go through the rest of the slides, but I think there is, when we get to the discussion part. Oh, sorry. I'm such a loud talker. But yes, the microphone. Yeah, so I would be curious when we get to the discussion part, if you noticed anything about that clip that you can relate to some of the struggles going on right now in all of our communities here in Ely, on the Iron Range, down in the metro, as well as in places like Aitkin County, about the future and who plans that future, how the decisions are made, and the influence of political power and money.
So this is my quick attempt at audience participation. We all just saw a great clip from the movie about this great experimental city. Who's been there? Jeff, awesome, awesome. What's it like? Do they have flying cars? Is it just the best place ever? Everything runs on nuclear power, I hear. Yeah, yeah. The fun fact that we may have seen alluded to in the movie just now is they never built it. It was never built. But one quote from the movie, which it's a very good movie if you have time. People don't want to live in an experimental city. So aside from the people who lived there and didn't want a giant city dropped on them, there was also the whole fact that nobody was going to move there. But importantly, as the movie clip that we just saw discussed, folks in Aitkin County were quite surprised. They didn't really want to sacrifice their lives and the land they lived on for a theoretical benefit for anonymous urban people. The environmentalist movement eventually hardened against this idea in Minnesota. And there really wasn't a process for doing this. So they were sort of building the airplane while they flew it, and eventually they crashed. Also, as we discussed this presentation yesterday, it was a perfect idea in the abstract, you know, like, but once you locate it in a place, it became a disaster. So like, what do you do with the water that's already there? What do you do with the waste that has to be generated when you do that amount of construction? All of these questions could not be answered. So the project died, and what can we learn? Yes, and this, importantly, remember, this was like in the late 60s, early 70s. It was before the passage of most of our environmental laws that we take for granted now. Since then, we've passed NEPA at the federal level, NEPA at the state level, MIRA at the state level, the Clean Water Act. It goes on, and also Minnesota has passed very progressive urban planning laws without building a single experimental city. It's amazing what you can do when you set your mind to it. And also in the meantime, people mostly have forgotten about the Minnesota experimental city and poor Athelstan Stillhouse, except for those of us who name our cats after him. But the future of the past is back today. Yet again, the techno-futurists are coming for Aitkin County, and I did grab all these great comic books from the 1940s about where atomic energy is going, adventures in electricity and adventures in electronics, because obviously we all know the future is in electric transportation, don't you know? So today we have another South African techno-futurist. He's great, everybody likes him. We have
Do they know?
everybody
Elon
knows
Musk, in case that wasn't out.
Elon Musk, he'll come up again. We have a similar pollution issues, climate change, biodiversity loss that seem even more intractable and incurable. And I don't know if you heard about this last month, but both NEPA and the Clean Water Act got gutted recently. So we can't take those for granted anymore. And if you listen to NPR as I do, the federal and state governments are both aligned to develop this green infrastructure against any indigenous or local opposition. The media, academics, everyone is aligned saying we got to build, baby, build. And that's the only way we can do it. We have to have permitting reform. Everything has to go faster. We have to stop listening to local opposition. And in this example here, I don't know if folks have heard about Thacker Pass, but that's a giant lithium mine that I believe Ford has bought into. And now the people who own the mine are suing the protesters, you know, First Amendment, Schmerz Amendment, I suppose, because they want to get going, building their mine. So not only are we in a similar era to the 1960s, we have a similar idea. This time we're going to build our way out of the problem with mining. You may have heard that Talon a year or two ago got a grant from the Department of Energy to do some research on carbon capture, just like the experimental city was going to do. It's entirely underground, but unfortunately they haven't put a geodesic dome on their imaginary mine yet. And also it'll be totally waste free because they're going to send literally everything they mine to a different state. Don't think too much about how hard that's going to be or whether it's literally impossible. And then of course, everyone's going to buy a Tesla because Talon is associated with Tesla Corporation, very loosely. What could possibly go wrong? The only thing they don't have is a nuclear power plant. But similarly, and because it's in exactly the same place, it's a similar sacrifice zone. proposed by these experts and foreign corporations and industrialists. And no one's really asked, what do the Mille Lacs Band and other locals in the area think? We haven't really asked how many people in Aitkin County or Minnesota as a whole would trade clean waters for a shiny new Tesla, or really even how many people in this community could afford such a thing. And then few people, especially at the national level, are asking whether this is really a climate solution as it's billed, or is it more just a specific worldview that comes from settler colonialism, and it's just another way to steal land that you weren't able to steal the last time. And then the final question we have that's perhaps worth discussing is, can one truly destroy wetlands in Minnesota and do that to save the environment? Like, can you really, if you just break one more wetland, the climate change will finally stop? I am skeptical of these things. And this is where I hand it off to Shanai, because she knows a lot more about this project than I do.
Thanks, Hudson.
Yeah. So I don't want to say too much, because I really am excited to hear what you all think and how you relate this to your experiences and what you're seeing here. But I wanted to show this image. Because, you know, Talon Metals and Rio Tinto have been getting a lot of press since they announced their initial mine plan. So where this project is at right now is that the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, which is the responsible governing unit for this project, currently has an initial mine plan. They are reviewing it, and soon, but we don't know how soon, we will see a draft scope. But Talon has indicated that, you know, everything is going to be clean and green. They've been listening to the community, which I can tell you, they have been listening, but they have not been answering any of our questions. And, you know, they're really downplaying the dangers of this mine. And so this is an image that we took from our drone of the existing tailings sumps. So they're doing a lot of exploratory drilling right now. 6 drills, 24/7, in a small area that they say is the target area, their high grade nugget. As my friend Chris Baldwin, a mining engineer, has said, this is one area that they intend to mine, but they're also drilling all across this deposit. And if you remember the map we showed, it's massive. It's about 12 to 13 miles long. It goes from north of Big Sandy Lake, very, very highly valued recreation lake, and also a sacred place, site of the Sandy Lake tragedy. And if you haven't heard of the Sandy Lake tragedy, you should look that up. There's actually a memorial paddle happening this week, where Anishinaabe from across the Great Lakes will come and paddle across Sandy Lake to honor their ancestors, who were essentially, there was an attempt to exterminate Anishinaabe people from the lands all across the Great Lakes. By promising them annuity payments if they came to Aitkin County in the winter, right before the winter. And then they were starved to death and many were sickened. And so this is a site that many call a tragedy. I've heard some call it a massacre. And it's been mostly erased. I mean, one thing you'll notice if you watch this entire movie, The Experimental City, not once does it mention Indigenous people. They're not in the movie about what happened with the experimental city, and they're not in the vision of the bright green future that's being proposed. And sometimes I wonder if they're in the vision of the bright green future that we're all considering right now. And so, you know, all of this is happening. Talon Metals is promising, oh yeah, there you go. And this map was actually created by the Mille Lacs Band as part of their Water Over Nickel initiative. So they're working really hard right now to make sure that we all know that they're opposed to this project because it threatens their Monoman, their wild rice lakes, their sacred sites, their treaty lands, their treaty rights. And so this time maybe we will hear, we will be able to hear, but whether or not we will be able to organize in a way that challenges those very, very well-funded political powers is an open question. So back to the picture of the sumps. So all of that exploratory drilling, they haven't even started mining. And this ore is very high grade. Yeah. Can you explain this picture?
Yes, so if you go to Aitkin County and you go to the town of Tamarack and you go a couple miles north of the town of Tamarack,
That's where they propose the portal will be for their nickel sulfide mine. And this is on the property that was purchased by Rio Tinto Kennecott to be the site, the initial portal to this mine. And so when they're drilling, they collect the drilling fluids because they are toxic. The drilling fluids themselves have proprietary chemicals. Some people have said that there's the risk of PFAS, for example, from these drilling fluids getting into our groundwater. And a lot of people around here, pretty much everybody has a well. We don't have good drinking water infrastructure in these towns. If we have a city system, some of them aren't functioning. In the town where I live, people can't drink their tap water because it has such high manganese, for example, that, you know, they've been instructed by the city itself that you should drink bottled water or buy a really expensive system. But a lot of people don't even know that. So they're drinking manganese and their children are drinking manganese. So, you know, we don't have that water infrastructure, but this is where they put those tailings, which also have lots of tiny pieces of metallic minerals that have come when they're drilling, right? And they're putting them in here. And this is part of their mitigation for their drilling. I wish I could explain it, but I don't know enough. All I know is that this does not look good. And already the trees are starting to die near these sumps. And so if we were to pull back, you'd notice that it's radiating out, like the water's moving underground. And so Talon has said, you know, this is going to be clean and green because we're going to ship all of our ore to North Dakota somehow. And we're going to dump our waste there because that's an existing sacrifice zone. And the people there are welcoming it, which I don't believe is true, but the governor certainly is. And so, you know, they're telling us this, but they're hiding this. You can't see this from the road. It's kind of hidden behind some trees that were planted about 20 years ago when Kennecott came to town. And, you know, maybe in the discussion, some folks in this room might have more information about this image, but that's what I know. You know, we're out there as organizers trying to protect our communities by gathering as much information as we can and being eyes on the ground and sometimes eyes in the air. You know, we use technology. Sometimes technology is necessary for us to be able to protect the places that we love. And then this is the final image. So this is Big Rice Lake, which is not far from the proposed Talon mine. I mentioned Sandy Lake, a very important site. This is another one. So this is Big Rice Lake. It's within the National Wildlife Refuge, Rice Lake National Wildlife Refuge. It's also a lake that only Anishinaabe can rice on. And I've had the privilege of being taken to that lake by some Anishinaabe people who live in the community, and it's been explained to me how important this lake is. Not only because it's a source of sustenance and it's a sacred place, but because, as Gene Skinaway Lawrence says of the Sandy Lake Band, monomen is their critical mineral. When they look to the future and imagine a future where they are there and thriving, it's not because of a nickel mine. It's because we didn't build a nickel mine. And so I just introduced these two images, the sumps and this lake, as another question about what our priorities are. You know, when we talk about climate solutions, are we talking about solutions that everyone can live with, or are we really talking about solutions that make some of us feel better about our choices? Because the problems are so intractable. And so that's where I'll leave it, I think. And Hudson, unless you have anything else to say. Yeah, I'd love to open it up. And I also just want to acknowledge that my friend Charlotte Lunsford is here today. I don't know if she would like to speak. Would you like to speak, Charlotte? If not, that's okay, but I can introduce you? Yeah. So Charlotte is Anishinaabe from Keweenaw. So the model mine that Talon likes to use as an example of an existing clean and green nickel mine is built in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, near Charlotte's home. And so, you know, Charlotte's here today because she's been spending some time with us in Aitkin County and helping us learn about the playbook that Rio Tinto Kennecott have. And some of you might also know that Talon Metals is more than just the mining company that's proposing a mine in Aitkin County. They also have 500,000 acres of mineral leases now in the Upper Peninsula. So they haven't even gotten their permit to mine in Minnesota, but they got $114 million to build a battery processing facility in North Dakota. And they're buying up nickel rights in the Upper Peninsula, and moving their drills there, where Eagle Mine is. And so there's more going on here, than just, what's happening in Aitkin County. And I wanted to, make that clear. And also, Miigwech Charlotte for spending time with us and for being here today. And do you want, anything you want to say? Yeah.
Charlotte Linsfoot, I'm from Lawrence, Michigan. Can you hear me okay? Okay. 2010, Rio Tinto came to our place over in Big Bay by Marquette, and me and a group of people went and set up a tree camp on their proposed tunnel to go into our sacred site, Eagle Rock, to build their mine. And we camped for about 5.5 weeks, and Kennecott came there, or Rio Tinto, and said, what are you doing here? And I says, oh, we're exercising our treaty rights to hunt, gather, and fish. And so we sat there about 5.5 weeks, and me and this other tribal member got arrested for trespassing. And that didn't work, but you know, we did start a ripple effect, and we did stop a major road highway that they're gonna build through the wetland through there. So now they have to go all the way around Marquette and then come back. But they're hauling in trucks with flaps and, you know, getting dust everywhere. So I'm glad we did that, and we're trying to keep an eye on them. They got more ore and deposits that they're looking at, and the deeper they go, the worse the toxicity that is coming up out of the ground. And this talent thing, you know, it's revving up, and we're all in this together. Every one of us, I don't care what color your skin is, we're all bleeding red, right? And we all gotta be a family and tight and connected, and that's the only way we're gonna save anything, you know? But Miigwech, thank you for everything.
Yeah. So anyone want to volunteer? Any thoughts that you had watching that clip, or when Hudson or I or Charlotte were speaking about the experimental cities? And anyone? Or a question, answer to the question about what we were looking at? Oh, Bob.
You activated my old memory cells talking about manganese, and you know, people can go over there and visit this both mine site. Highway 210 goes west of Duluth. You go right through Tamarack, you notice it's all wetlands when you drive through there. But 9 inches manganese. When you're in that area, if you go about 30 miles north of Brainerd, you can see what the future of mining looks like, because there's a town of manganese. And you can find that town on your Minnesota Atlas. On that atlas, you can type it into your GPS will take you to manganese. And when you get to manganese, you'll find nothing. Pat and I started going there 10, 15 years ago, just to check it out. We saw the town of manganese, and all there was a few chimneys. We went back about a month ago. You can't even find the chimneys anymore. The streets are still there. So manganese is a ghost town. You can figure that's probably the future of a lot of these mining projects that are going to try to soak up our resources and our money.
Thank you. Yeah, and since you mentioned manganese, I was actually, Alan in the back there, who's another organizer working with us. Alan and I work with Honor the Earth. We also are volunteers for Tamarack Water Alliance, and I live in the local community, Alan's in Duluth. We were invited over to the town of Emily to visit with some community members there, because the town of Emily, which is about 35 miles from the town of Palisade, which I mentioned, you know, their drinking water is poisoned by manganese, and the water system's underfunded. Over in Emily, there's a proposal for a manganese mine. And it's a really complicated proposal. There's a lot of companies involved, a lot of local people, a lot of government representatives, but the people that live there have started to put the pieces together. And they realize that if this manganese mine goes forward, their town will no longer exist, because the proposal is for an open pit that would basically gobble up much of what is the town of Emily, which is a small town with lots of beautiful lakes and a recreational tourist economy, but it's small. And so in those conversations, we started to piece together that a lot of us who live in these tiny little rural towns, we were fighting these giant companies and we don't know how to find each other because our towns really aren't on the map. You know, when they went through the site selection and they were deciding what made it an attractive place, one of the pieces of it was actually the lack of people and the poverty. That's what makes a good site for one of these extraction projects. The other thing they mentioned was availability of public land. Now, the background of that is that the availability of public land in Aitkin County, there's so much public land because so much land was tax forfeited by settlers who couldn't farm after the county stopped paying to dredge and drain the ditches. So water, you know, we've had this ongoing relationship with water. And where we are now is that a lot of that land doesn't have people living on it to watch over it and to protect it. And we have a hard time finding each other, like I said. So one of the things I also wanted to express with this presentation today is that we do need you. We need the people who've been fighting these sulfide mines in places like Ely or in Duluth to come to Tamarack, to meet with communities like ours and tell us what you know. Share your strategies, share your expertise, you know, get involved. Because like Charlotte said, we really are all in this together. And if you add up all of those tiny little mines, the picture of Minnesota, of northeastern Minnesota, and all the way over to Michigan, and all the way around Lake Superior is really pretty scary. And you know, we've been fighting these things, I think, one at a time. But we have to start thinking the way they're thinking, right? Right now, they're thinking big, you know, all like Rio Tinto, Talon Metals, they're not waiting to get their mine in Minnesota before they start to develop their mine in Michigan. So we can't wait until we're at like treaty camp to recognize that, you know, this isn't gonna stop in one place. It's gonna stop with all of us, right? If that's what we choose to value and if we choose to listen to the people. So yeah, any other questions, comments? Yeah.
I've got a microphone I can.
Oh, yeah.
Mute
But
that.
there's right here.
Yep.
I was just gonna say, we are happy to share. I don't know if you remember, but we had a Zoom about,
With
last,
Tamarack Water Alliance. Yeah.
August with, our government relations team and our science and policy team to explain how we go camping to save the boundary.
Yeah, yeah.
And all our science is on our website. It's there for you to use, and we're happy to help in any way we can.
Thank you, yeah. That's true. Yeah, and a lot of you have, I should acknowledge that, because I know some of you now by name, because you've been showing up, and we really do appreciate that. And we need that, we need more of that.
So we had a hand over here, we've got one here, I'll do first.
My name is Jeff Hansen, anyway. Referring back to Bob's comment about the city or little town of Manganese. I don't know how many people know about the largest mining disaster in the history of Minnesota. Was a manganese mine. Right there. Where was water disaster? That underground mine was built right alongside a Minnesota lake. That lake broke through into the mine shaft in a matter of minutes, drowned 47 miners. So the interaction of the water and the mining, things can go wrong. And that is the largest fatal mining disaster in the history of Minnesota. Right there by that lake, Manganese, and that's why the town, it's not there, there's just streets. And I walk those streets. Because it is a lesson to be learned.
Thank you.
Testing. My name is Chris Baldwin. I'm a retired mining engineer. And I spent 23 years drilling and blasting and blowing up taconite, amongst other things. I spent the last 7 years before retirement in South Carolina permitting starting up a sulfide gold mine, the only one east of Mississippi. I guess my primary issue is that we're being attacked and raided by international mining companies that I'll just say are extremely predatory. And the reason why is that there's a shrinking number of mineral deposits on the face of the planet that are easy to get to. And Minnesota is ripe for the picking, and we shouldn't allow somebody to come and just simply take our stuff. Now, do we own this? Do we own this? Does anybody gonna say that, yes, we own it because it's in Minnesota and we're a resident of Minnesota? We own this mineral rights over a predatory mining company. If we don't express our voice in unity, we won't have a choice in it. And it'll be like Enbridge using eminent domain to simply confiscate your property. They need a power line or a waste dump or whatever, they'll just take it. So if we don't do something, it's just gonna be taken. Whether it's a Serbian oligarch that decides to try to start up Twin Metals, or PolyMet with Glencore, or Rio Tinto in Talent. Rio Tinto is the Spanish word for Red River. And if you look at the Red River in Spain, you'll have it here. Just as a warning, this is what the state of the industry is. And if you don't do something, you'll just be run over like a truck.
Yeah, thanks.
One over here.
Yeah, hi, thank you. That was an outstanding presentation. My name is Emily Johnson, and I actually work for the Mille Lacs Band, Ojibwe, and involved with the Water Over Nickel campaign. And when you talked about, I just wanted to mention, when you talked about the international connections, they are very scary. And if you look at who's leading Talon, Talon Metals was started by a company called Tal Capital, which is all South African. And the board members of Tal and the board members of Rio Tinto basically trade places every few years. It's all the same. And since Talon has come to public, they still are led primarily by South African interests, despite the fact that they portray themselves as being a local company. They do employ some local folks, but that's not who they are. And the other thing that we always mention is that, and I liked whoever was it, I think several said that it's all of our problem. And it is, and 96% of all the nickel reserves are in Minnesota, northeastern Minnesota. So we're being targeted not just by friends, but also by people who should be our allies. So that's something to think about, is holding the Minnesota DNR and the Biden administration accountable in whatever way you can. Thank you.
Thank you so much for so the Water Over Nickel website that Mille Lacs Band has created has a lot of really good information on it. That map that I put in the presentation is there. And I think you can sign up to get action alerts or information from the Mille Lacs Band. Tamarack Water Alliance is a group of local folks, native and non-native, who've been coming together to share good information and to organize together, because it is kind of hard in our little towns to speak up. I mean, a lot of us, you know, I grew up in the town, and it was definitely not a ladylike thing to do. And you know, when you're brave and you speak out like that, you're targeted. And so another reason, and especially Native people, they're not only erased from these kinds of conversations and the futures that we're imagining, but they experience racialized violence, sexualized violence, and they're very visible in our communities. And so that's another reason why we have to work together. And so I thank you for speaking up. And then, yeah, Tal Capital. There's also quite a lot of corruption. It doesn't take very long to dig and find that, like, the CEOs and the chairman of the board of Tal Capital was basically ousted from his position as an ambassador to Grenada because of some money laundering. And, you know, that's all available out there on the internet. But then, you know, and also locally, you know, we're seeing a lot of corruption going on between local and county officials, with our state government, with the federal government. And, you know, it doesn't take much to dig into that. And so we do need to be aware of the problem that we're facing, and find smart ways to organize.
Can I say one thing about today? Along these lines, all of you have an opportunity in this effort to protect Minnesota tonight. The city council is entertaining a proclamation tonight to show appreciation for Twin Meadows, Minnesota over the Blueberry Festival, the 3 days of the Blueberry Festival. I encourage every one of you who thinks that the city council should be appreciating a lot of other businesses in Ely that actually do employ people and contribute to our community in many ways, and not Twin Meadows, which is dead mine walking. It doesn't really have anything going anymore. And so show up, bring an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, write on there a business you appreciate, whether it's Zook's or the State Theater or Mike's Liquor or whatever it is. And be there to tell the city council that there are a lot of really positive, wonderful businesses in town that should be appreciated, but Twin Meadows is not one of them. Start at 5:30.
We did have one more comment. Yeah, sorry. Or question maybe?
Yeah, Gary Noble. I picked up in the clip you showed from the documentary that while they were working on this city for a long time, the folks in Aitkin County were quite unaware of it until late in the game. Reminded of the wood products mess over in Cohasset. They tried to push that through and they never bothered talking to the band. And who eventually finally challenged it, and they didn't kill it. All they asked for was an environmental assessment. Everybody else should have to do. So much of this happens under the radar, and it's folks like you and Becky and the other activists that really dig in and get this stuff out there, so the rest of us can be aware of it and join in the cause. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, the Huber Mill. Unfortunately, I heard that the Huber Mill is not a dead project because now they're looking at a site in St. Louis County. But I think that whole episode illustrates a lot of, what we saw in the film, which is that it was hubris that killed the Huber Mill, and actually a violation of the law. And so, you know, as Huber was canceled, and then the Twin Meadows leases were revoked, and then the Fond du Lac ban fought the Polymet project with a sovereign water quality standard. You know, as these things are happening, I can tell you that on the ground, things are heating up. So the flip side of that is that those of us who live in communities where these proposed mines are seen as the savior, they're seen as the jobs, they're seen as the only option communities like ours can have, that increases the violence, it increases the harassment, it increases the threat to activists, to indigenous communities. And so it's really important that we also be clear, like when we see those kinds of projects getting stopped for those very valid reasons, that we push back against the narrative that says it was just arbitrary obstructionism, you know, from indigenous people. Again, because our senator Farnsworth, some of you may have read that at an IRRB meeting recently, he wanted to know why the IRRB, which redistributes mining tax money to supposedly diversify our economy away from extraction, why there isn't some mechanism that they can use to exclude their opponents. And he said, I'm speaking specifically about the Leech Lake Band. So it wasn't just any opponent, it was indigenous communities should be excluded from economic development funds because they don't want their lands defiled and their lands stolen. And then when Alan, back in the back, he confronted Senator Farnsworth in a very pointed way at an Aitkin County Legislative Forum about this. And instead of saying or clarifying what he was trying to say, he doubled down. And he said, I don't just mean indigenous communities, I mean anyone who doesn't like mining is our opponent. They are an opponent to our way of life, and we think they should be excluded. That's a really dangerous idea. I mean, for so many reasons. And then he doubled down and said, I don't care if it hurts your feelings. And so, you know, there's a lot still going on, even with a proposal like Huber. which was successfully stopped because the Leech Lake Band exercised their right to consultation. It's not stopped in a different sense, which is that now it's like this all piling up and Talon Metals is coming. And so I really think follow the Mille Lacs Band and what's going on, because this is really, really important. Thank you for bringing that example. Anything else?
Let's do this is the last one. Okay, hopefully it'll be. Oh, I didn't turn it off. I'm sorry.
We can all talk too. I mean, don't have to run away, I think.
Well, oops, sorry, just on this theme of state legislators and, you know, maybe holding them to account. I was just wondering, I'd seen recently on Twitter that for those of us who live in Ely, our state senator, Hochschild, recently took a tour of the Talon Metal site and seemed
They love to give tours.
very enthusiastic about the project. I think it was something like full steam ahead on Talon Metals. And I was just wondering if he had engaged with you in the community or with the Mille Lacs Band before he sort of decided to endorse this project.
None of the political leaders that I know who come to tour the Talon mine have proactively reached out to local community opposition that I'm aware of. I don't know about the Mille Lacs Band. I don't know if Emily, you know that answer, or they didn't get any. Nobody's getting any consultation. Okay, I think that's it. Hudson, do you have anything else to say? Thank you, Hudson, for having this idea for this presentation. It was really a good way to talk about some really hard stuff. So I just wanted to thank you for writing it.